The Baltimore Ravens lose to the Miami Dolphins by the final score of 22-10 in Week 10. We talk about the loss next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. This episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's an unofficial community center. A big thank you to our friends at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. And we returned here on this non-victory Purple Friday for the Baltimore Ravens, as they fall in Week 10 to the Miami Dolphins on Thursday Night Football, their fourth primetime game of the 2021 season. It was 22-10, and what a game, and I don't mean that in a good way. The Ravens just could not get anything going on the offensive side of the football. The defense did their job for the most part, but did have a couple of miscommunications, some broken coverages, and also some missed tackles. But this is a game that so many people, the whole week, the Ravens talking about all of the close games that they've had and all the impressive performances so far, coming off of such a great overtime win, a comeback victory against Minnesota in Week 9, and then just going on the road to play Miami, a team that they had dominated over the last 3 seasons. And the performance that they put on the field was disappointing, embarrassing. There are a lot of things. This is, I think, the worst loss in the Lamar Jackson era. And there have been a few to kind of look back on and say, wow, that was bad. You could go back a couple weeks and look to Cincinnati. But I think this was worse because just this was the worst offensive performance, at least in the Lamar Jackson era for this Ravens team. And I know people could also go back to 2019 and look at the Cleveland 40-25 game in Week 4. That's another one you could go and look at. But I think that all things considered, considering the opponent they were playing, considering the record that they had and what they had showed so far this season, I think this is the most disappointing and the worst loss in the Lamar Jackson era. But again, there are a few that you could put out there. So in the first segment, we'll talk about the Baltimore offense and what they brought to the table, which was not a lot. And so we'll do that in the first segment. In the second segment, we'll flip the field, talk about the Baltimore defense. In the final segment, really just talking about where the Ravens go from here, because there are plenty of directions this loss could take them in. I hope that the loss takes them in a good place. They can learn from it, build on it, but we will have to see. In the meantime, though, before I dive into it, if you are following along with us in audio form, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, be sure to follow us there. Our content comes out Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. It's the same thing on YouTube if you're following along with us there. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. It does help out the YouTube algorithm. We are going for 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. That's our first goal. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at ChaosStricker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. And also, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. And also, thank you for listening after a Ravens loss. I know how hard and difficult it can be to do that. So I really appreciate you tuning in here and talking about this loss with me and listening to what I have to say about it. So let's dive into it here. And again, just so disappointing. The Ravens only putting up 10 points on the offensive side of the football against the Miami defense that really struggled coming into this game. They were a middling unit all the way around, a middling to bottom tier unit. It's not like they were playing absolutely atrocious football, but they weren't playing good football. And this was a game where the Ravens should have put up a lot more points than they did. The Ravens didn't score their first touchdown until about 4 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. It was a game full of field goals and a game full of defensive touchdowns, at least one for Miami, until this game. Getting into the actual box score stats, Lamar Jackson finished 26 of 43 for 238 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception at the very end of the football game. He also carried the football 9 times for 39 yards. Devonta Freeman in the ground game, 10 for 35. Devin Duvernay, 1 for 19. Le'Veon Bell, 3 for 1. But let's take a step back and talk about Lamar Jackson. Jackson in this game was clearly very rattled, and early in the game, we saw a lot of checks from him where he would go up to the line and see adjustments that he could make and check into a different play. Some of those came in the short passing game. We saw screen after screen after screen, and all those screens, it was more screens than I think we saw in the last 5 seasons for the Ravens combined. It was so many screens early on, and they just were not working. Now, why Lamar Jackson? wanted to check into those screens. He saw something at the line that he didn't like for the play call that he was given, and he wanted to check out of it, or he got an alternative play call from Greg Roman, and he wanted to do that. And the Dolphins are bringing a lot of pressure. And it got to Jackson. The offensive line did not have a good day whatsoever. And it was getting to him, but some of the best blitz beaters in the NFL, and I think we've seen this firsthand when we've watched Baltimore play, and they're bringing blitzes, and what do teams do to combat that? It's running short passes, running screens, getting the quick throws off so that when those blitzers come and those defenders come at the line, they don't have time to actually get to the quarterback and bring them down. So then guys are in one-on-one situations, and you can have blockers out in front if you want to. But the short passing game just was not there. The Ravens, their screen game is so weird because it feels like over these past couple of seasons, they don't run screens very effectively outside of a few here and there. And then they can't defend screens either. So screens are like one of the biggest weaknesses of this team on both sides of the football. And we saw passes getting batted at the line and other plays where blockers weren't out in front. It was like 4 Miami defenders against 1 Ravens blocker or something. And the Ravens continue to go back to it. They tried some more deep shots later in the game, but even still, it didn't really work out. Marquise Brown drew a pass interference, which was, it was kind of there. But the offense, we all talked about it leading up to this game. I talked about it leading up to this game, and it was one of the reasons why, even though I did say Baltimore was going to win big, and look, I own up to it. I said it, and I was wrong. One of the reasons I said that the Ravens could lose this game, one was because they just weren't prepared, and if they try to downplay Miami, that was one of them. Another one was because if the Ravens didn't get off to a fast start, it could really change the tempo and the flow of the game. And I think that's exactly what happened. Baltimore moves the ball really well on their first 2 offensive drives, gaining, I believe, 92 combined yards on those drives. So it wasn't like they were going 80 yards each drive, but they were getting a really good field position and kind of moving with the football with it, getting Justin Tucker in situations to kick field goals. But the issue is that they needed to end those drives in touchdowns. And on those first 2 offensive possessions, the Ravens get 3 points on a Tucker-made field goal and a Tucker missed field goal that I believe was actually tipped at the line. The one that he missed, I think, was tipped just barely at the line. But even so, those are drives you have to finish at the NFL level. We saw Lamar Jackson, they're in field goal range and they get sacked out of field goal range. We've seen that a lot of times this season. It happened in this game as well. And it just felt like after Tucker kicked the first field goal, because the Ravens started off, they were running the football well. Devonta Freeman had a nice play. Devin Duvernay on those first 2 drives had a couple of nice plays, but the Ravens just could not finish. Third down was the reason the Ravens lost this game, or at least one of them. The Ravens finished this game 2 of 14 on third down. That's around 14% for those counting. The Dolphins, on the other hand, finished 3 of 13. That's around 23%. So it's not like either team performed well on third down, but the Ravens, it's a killer to have a team that, Miami only scored 22 points. The Ravens can easily beat that total with the offense that they have, with the talent that they have on that offense, but they just really couldn't do it. The play calling from Greg Roman was, I believe, suspect at best. Now, it's not all on Roman, and I know that might upset some people. It's partially on him. I'm not going to excuse him of all blame here and say, it was the players. The players didn't execute well in this game. The offensive line was just not good. Marquise Brown had a few drops. The running game kind of tailored off after the first half a little bit. But we just saw play call after play call that didn't make sense. One of the plays was, a screenplay on like 3rd and 10 where there was like 1 or 2 blockers out in front. Miami had like 5 guys there. It's plays like that where you kind of question it. And I thought Roman has done a decently good job this season adjusting, but the adjustments just weren't there. Was it a short week? Was it this or that? John Harbaugh said that they just weren't ready, and that's on him. So he took the blame for the loss. But I mean, I mentioned the receiving core. Marquise Brown had those 2 drops. He finished with 6 receptions for 37 yards. Rashad Bateman led this team with 6 receptions for 80 yards, averaging 13.3 yards per catch. Mark Andrews, 6 for 63 and a score. Devin Duvernay, 4 for 28. Devonta Freeman, 3 for 23, and Sammy Watkins, 1 for 7. Sammy Watkins did not have a good game. Sammy Watkins, some people will say, is the reason the Ravens lost this football game. He had a couple of just brutal plays on that first Ravens drive. I believe it was the first one. It was one of the first 2. The Ravens, Lamar Jackson, there was a really pretty deep ball pass. He was getting pressure. The Dolphins sent the house, and Jackson, as he's getting hit, he kind of sends that football deep. It's a good ball. It's a ball in the end zone that Sammy Watkins should have absolutely at least made an attempt to catch. He kind of slows up and doesn't really make an effort to catch the ball. Now, my theory is he either lost it in the lights or he was worried about running into the base of the goalpost because he was pretty close to it, but I don't think that's an excuse. Look, if you don't see the ball, you don't see the ball. And I understand that. And it's difficult to really make a catch if you don't know where the football is. But it's just wasted opportunities. And that resulted, in only 3 points for the Ravens. So then you have a team that could have really started to get momentum on a fast start. But the Ravens, they just could not get off to a fast start in this game for whatever reason. And I think that gave the Miami defense confidence. And we saw that the Miami defense gets to Lamar Jackson 4 times, countless other pressures. It was bad overall for the Ravens offensive line. We saw miscommunications. We saw Ben Powers just completely leave a guy, and he went right up the middle and got to Lamar Jackson. So it's those types of plays where no matter who your quarterback is, no matter who your running backs are, if there's a defender in the backfield 1 second after the snap, there's not a lot that a player can do with that. And Lamar Jackson is one of the best escape artists in the NFL, and even he can't do a lot with it. So the Ravens have to look themselves in the mirror on offense. The defense, I think, did their job for the most part. It was not perfect by them, but this was a game that the offense lost, the worst offensive performance in the Lamar Jackson era. We'll kind of get into what they need to do in the final segment, but yeah, just not a great game overall. The running game just wasn't there outside of a long run from Devin Duvernay early in the contest. I mentioned Le'Veon Bell, just 3 carries for 1 single yard. So they have some time to recover, to make adjustments, as their game against Chicago is not for another 10 days, but I still believe that this offense was the reason the Ravens lost the football game, which is something in the Lamar Jackson era you just do not hear very often. We're going to head into our first break, though. We'll make it back. We'll be diving into the Ravens defense, talking about what they did, so stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. This episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving community since 1965. McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's a place where friends and family can come to reconnect, a place where classmates can meet up for a study group knowing they'll have dependable Wi-Fi and unlimited supplies of French fries and McFlurries. Where in Lewis, it's a place where teammates, competitors of the home team, or the away team can come to recharge. It's the place you always look forward to stopping at on a long road trip to rest your legs and refuel. You can go into McDonald's after a Little League game or stopping in after a big sporting event. So head to your local McDonald's to refuel and reconnect. I'm loving it. We return here. It's our second segment of this Friday edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still talking with you here after the Ravens fall to the Miami Dolphins by the final score of 22-10 in Week 10. Baltimore falls to 6-3. Miami moves to 3-7. As we talked about in the first segment, I'm putting the blame on the offense in this one. I think the defense did their job. And look, the Miami offense coming into this game were a bottom 3 unit in both running and throwing the football and looking at net yards per attempt and yards per carry. So all things considered, it made some sense when Baltimore had only allowed 1 touchdown, but it wasn't on the defense. The offense allowed that touchdown on the Sammy Watkins fumble, which was his other bad play. We talked about the one he kind of lost in the lights or was worried about the goalpost in the first segment. That the Ravens defense didn't allow their first touchdown until about 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And usually when an opposing defense can hold an offense to just 1 offensive touchdown, the Dolphins also had 2 field goals in this one, you win the football game. But the Ravens offense just could not capitalize. And you kind of think after the Ravens scored that first touchdown, you're thinking, all right, well, is another comeback win? Is that what's going to happen here? And then, the defense did falter. They gave up that big play on a miscommunication, and that was really the story. It was miscommunications was actually really the big story in this game for the Baltimore defense. I think they really were missing Deshaun Elliott, losing such a big playmaker on such a short week against, a team that is still an NFL team, but, I'm not making excuses. It was still a bad loss. The Miami Dolphins are one of the worst teams in the NFL right now. It was just overall brutal because most of them involved Chuck Clark or Anthony Averett or Brandon Stevens. And the Ravens also did miss a few tackles. There were a couple. But all things considered, the Ravens do, as I mentioned, hold the Dolphins to just 3 of 13 on third down. Now, the Ravens did actually win the time of possession battle, but my theory is crushed. As I usually say, if the Ravens have that victory in the time of possession battle, they win the football game. Baltimore held up for 31 minutes and 49 seconds. Miami for 28 minutes and 11 seconds. That 3 for 13 on third down should have honestly won them the game. But 22 points for the Dolphins. We've seen the Ravens score 59 on the Dolphins and 40 on the Dolphins, but this obviously isn't the same Dolphins team. They have talent on the defensive side of the ball. Xavier Howard. They have Jalen Phillips on that team as well. A couple of really, really nice players, and they put it all together in this game. A lot of things went right for the Dolphins, and they just played good, sound football overall. But the offense, the Miami offense, it wasn't like they were doing an insane job at everything that they were doing on offense. As a team, Miami only averaged 2.7 yards on the ground, 2.7 yards per carry. Their leading rusher, Myles Gaskin, had 14 carries for just 31 yards. So it's not like they lit the world on fire running the football, and throwing the football, they weren't amazing either. They did average 8.7 yards per attempt. They had Tua Tagovailoa come in this game and go 8 of 13 for 158 yards after Jacoby Brissett left the game with 11 of 23 completions for 156 yards. So, all things considered, I think Baltimore did their job for the most part on defense, and it wasn't perfect. And that's where, it's not only on the offense, it's not only on the defense, but again, if your defense only allows one offensive touchdown for the entire game, you should be winning the football game. And that's where I just think the Ravens have some looking in the mirror to do on both sides, but the offensive side of the ball is more of the way that I'm looking right now. Now, Baltimore came into this game. It was a big storyline I talked about throughout the week, averaging just 1.9 sacks per game through 8 games. They had 4 in this one. It was nice to see the Ravens get some pressure and some sacks, bringing the quarterback down, not just getting the pressure in this game. Patrick Queen had a sack, Josh Bynes, Odafe Owe, and also Justin Houston. Houston got his 100th career sack, although unfortunately Jacoby Brissett got injured on that play. Hopefully he's okay. It seemed like he was up moving around, but Brian Flores goes with Tagovailoa, and the rest is history. And also Joe Buck kept calling him Tagovailoa, and that was just not accurate whatsoever. You got it right, but he was calling him Tagovailoa a bunch in that game. Just a funny side note. But back to the task at hand. The fact that Baltimore wasn't able to get the job done when it mattered is where a lot of people are upset, because a lot of people look and they say, yeah, the Ravens didn't allow a touchdown and they played well for the most part, probably on defense outside of those miscommunications, which are a big thing, and those breakdowns, which are a big thing. But when it mattered, when the Ravens had scored that offensive touchdown in the fourth quarter and they were maybe setting up for another comeback victory, an impressive comeback victory, all of a sudden that breakdown happens at the worst possible time. It seems like it was the fault of Brandon Stevens, who just was in no man's land defending the run. Had Albert Wilson just motions across, and literally no one was there. There was no one within like a 20-yard radius of him. It was actually unbelievable for the timing of the play. Chuck Clark brings him down, but I think Brandon Stevens had that responsibility, and it just wasn't it. We saw the other breakdown on the big play before the half where Anthony Averett thinks he has safety help, so he kind of drops into a short zone, and the guy just runs right past him. I believe it was Isaiah Ford, and there's just no one there. So it was those big plays. Baltimore's been a very bad big play defense this season. They've allowed multiple plays of over 20 yards. That did not change on Thursday night. So as they head to Chicago in week 11, they do have some thinking to do on defense. They did kind of, I thought week 9 was a lot better performance in terms of their tackling. Week 10 was also better than what we saw in like week 6, week 7, or all those other games like week 5 or something. But there were a few that you're like, oh, you know why? Like Josh Bynes had a tackle he knows he should have made. There were a couple others. Tavon Young, by the way, I think might be the Ravens' best tackler. And it's unfortunate because he left the game with a foot injury. He was deemed questionable to return. I don't believe he did return. So we'll see what the injury is with him. Hopefully it's nothing serious. He's been kind of banged up on the practice injury reports, but he's been good to go. So hopefully we'll see him get out there this upcoming week and have him play in Chicago, because that would be a very big loss if after losing to Sean Elliott, they lose Tavon Young the following week. And obviously not having Marcus Peters in there is also a very big blow. So yeah, I'm not pinning this loss on the defense. I'd say this is definitely an offensive problem for them. And as we'll talk about in the final segment, the Ravens do pride themselves on those comeback victories where it takes them a lot of time to get off to those fast starts on both sides of the ball, where really, we saw the defense struggling and not being able to stop anything. And then all of a sudden they kind of clamp up. But in this game, they kind of clamped up for most of the game. I think they did a good job executing their blitzes, but there were some times where the pressure just wasn't getting there. And against the Miami team that has the worst offensive line in the NFL, I think they needed to generate just a bit more pressure. Not that they didn't do it, not that they didn't have a little bit of pressure, they did, but it just seemed like the Ravens could have gotten maybe a 5th or 6th sack in there, which could have maybe turned the tides. There weren't a ton of defensive penalties in this one. I know Marlon Humphrey had the pass interference in the end zone that got the Dolphins to the 1, and then the Ravens actually hold for a nice red zone stand on the 1-yard line, which is great. The Dolphins had that Robert Hunt touchdown, or should have been touchdown if he was eligible, but he wasn't eligible, so it wasn't a touchdown. One of the crazier plays reminded me of the Tyree Phillips play when the Ravens played Jacksonville last season. But yeah, this defense, I think, showed strides in this game. That's a positive I take away from it, but there are the negatives that are glaring. Those negatives take over the positives in a loss like this, especially an embarrassing one. where you have a team that should have handily beaten Miami. The defense, multiple breakdowns, contributing to Miami points. And that's really where this defense struggled a ton. They're going to have to figure it out on the defensive side of the ball with those big plays. If they want to make a deep playoff run, because I know they do and they have the talent to do so, they have to stop giving up those big plays and breaking down in communication. And it's going to be different with guys coming in and out every single week. But Tavon Young goes down. They really don't have their backup slot corner active, who at this point I believe would probably be Darius Washington if they had it their way. They can move guys inside, but it seems like they like Washington as more of a slot player. They had Geno Stone playing significant snaps, Brandon Stevens as well. Jimmy Smith's been kind of a mystery man over these past couple of weeks. We'll see what ends up happening with him. But yeah, overall, the Ravens, the loss is a crushing one. It's a brutal, embarrassing, decimating loss. One that, when we talk about the Ravens in this final segment where they need to go, there are plenty of places both on offense and defense where they could have this loss take them. So we'll head into our final break. And when we get back, we will be diving into where the Ravens go from here. So stay tuned for that. Hey, Ravens fans, this is Kevin Oestreicher with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about and Get Upside. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code TOUCHDOWN and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill-up. That's up to 50 cents a gallon cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime through your banking app, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code TOUCHDOWN. We return here, our final segment of this Friday episode of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still talking with you here on a day that is a sad one for a lot of people who watch, cover, whatever with the Baltimore Ravens. Anything as the Ravens fall 22-10 to the Miami Dolphins in Week 10, Thursday Night Football in prime time. The Ravens, just not a good game. And there are plenty of places where this loss can take them. One of those places is to a dark place where all of a sudden this team gets down on themselves and they can't play good football for the rest of the season. That's the place I don't think it's going. This team is resilient. Calais Campbell talked about the 24-hour rule where you kind of have those 24 hours and it's back to work and you're prepped for the next week. And I think that's where this team is. We've seen the resiliency, and I understand that there's no excuse for this loss. There's really, really not. But I do think that this loss will be a wake-up call. Marlon Humphrey talked about it a little bit, and it needs to be. I mean, if it's not, there's an issue. Because as I said, and as I'm going to get into now, the Ravens needed to go 3-0 in the stretch of weeks 9 through week 11. To go to 8-2, to have that record heading into a brutal back half of their schedule where they have Cleveland twice, they have Pittsburgh twice, they have Cincinnati, they have Green Bay, and they have the Los Angeles Rams, who, by the way, have acquired Von Miller and Odell Beckham Jr. in a short span. To go in an 8-2 is so big for seeding purposes, is so big for conference tiebreakers, is so big for a lot of different things there. I'm personally not worried about the Ravens' playoff chances. I still think they can get there. I still think they have the talent to. I think even despite the injuries, they're too talented not to get to that point with this season. But at the same time, out of the 3 games, this was the one they needed to win, this Miami game. And not because Miami's a bad opponent, they should blow them out, but because of AFC seeding, AFC tiebreakers, conference record. This goes on there as a blemish. Against Minnesota, you don't really care about conference. They're in the NFC. Chicago, same thing. They're in the NFC. But Miami was the game that I think when we look back in week 17 or week 18, if the Ravens are fighting for seeding, if there's a difference between, a 5th seed and a 7th seed, if they're a wild card team, if they're in the lead in the AFC North, they're looking for the 2 seed versus the 4 seed. This conference record, this loss to Miami could have big implications on that. So that's why, even dating back to before the Minnesota game, before the season, I identified that stretch after the bye. The weeks 9, 10, and 11 is a stretch where the Ravens had to go 3-0, and they didn't do it. They beat Minnesota barely. They lose to Miami in embarrassing fashion. So against Chicago, that has to be the statement game. It does. I think it has to be the statement game for this Ravens team because they'll be able to build some confidence. This was a game where I thought the Ravens could establish some momentum on offense and on defense against a team that's been struggling all year. Just barely beat the Houston Texans last week in a game that was not pretty for them. And this was a game that the Ravens the offense was so poor for 4 quarters. I mean, the 4th quarter was the one where, again, you score the offensive touchdown. You're like, all right, here it comes, the comeback win. And the defense gives up the big play and it just all goes It all goes way of the fans. So with Baltimore, I think they will use this as motivation. They're a tough team. John Harbaugh, it was a rough day for the coaching staff, I think, too. Don Martindale, Greg Roman, even Harbaugh himself, he admitted it. His team was not ready coming on that short week. The Ravens do have to be better. I understand the excuse of a short week. John Harbaugh wasn't using the short week as an excuse, but he also said the Dolphins are bringing a lot of cover 0, cover 1 that I just don't think the team was prepared for. And the offensive line did not play well. They did not execute. The formations were kept very tight. So outside guys were getting to Lamar Jackson on a beeline very quickly. There are all these types of things that the Ravens need to work on as they head into week 11. They have the time. It's like a mini bye right now. So they had the bye in week 8. They now have a mini bye here in week 10 leading up to week 11. They have opportunities. They need to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think it's so important for them to do that. This is also a big test for Greg Roman because he's taken a lot of flack for his time as offensive coordinator in the Baltimore Ravens. Well, he doesn't wear a uniform, I guess, his Baltimore Ravens shirt. So he will have a tough test over these last games of the regular season to show that he indeed is the guy. You want to have continuity. Greg Roman, a very good architect of a very good rushing offense, a very historic rushing offense over the past couple of seasons. But I do want to say that there's only so much a team can do with injuries. And what I mean by that is there's so much they can do. They can win the Super Bowl. They can absolutely do it. They can also fall off a cliff and lose every game in the season. Now, with the Ravens, they've shown that what they can do and the so much they can do is this big resilient stretch they've been on. But you see the drop off from J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards to guys like Freeman and Murray. That's what I mean by there's only so much you can do because the drop off, a ceiling of a team only gets capped by that much, the performance of some certain positions. So now we're going to see Sammy Watkins did not look like himself in yesterday's game or last night's game. We'll see if he's able to hopefully kind of throw that aside. A lot of teams, a lot of players in the NFL have games they'd like to forget. This is definitely one of them. And that's what Calais Campbell is talking about with their, all right, 24 hours, we're going to move on, and that's it. And that's exactly what they needed to do. Put this one in the rearview mirror, but that doesn't mean that, all right, the mistakes are gone because the game is over. We had the 24 hours. All right, the mistakes are over. Let's keep doing it. No, there have to be adjustments made. The offensive line is going to be a key point of emphasis for them in the offseason. Maybe another pass rusher. You look in the secondary as well. They have a ton of free agents to re-sign. Losing Patrick McCarry was huge for this team. Tyree Phillips struggled in this one. Ben Powers didn't have a great game. Villanueva. It's just the inconsistencies that the Ravens are going to have to deal with because they just don't have players like Ronnie Stanley out there right now. They don't have them. So they have to figure it out. I do think that as Nick Boyle comes back, that will be a big plus. I think they missed him tonight. And if the Ravens were thinking, oh, you know what? We can rest Boyle for the extra 10 days. We get an easy game against Miami. It didn't work out. I don't think that was the reason, though. I just really think they wanted to give him the extra rest because he just, maybe there was a little bit of, I'm 99%, not 100 yet. So the 10 days will get him there. But Boyle's return will be huge. Hopefully, whenever Derek Wolfe returns, that'll be big. Hopefully, he's able to return. Brandon Williams, Latavius Murray. There are guys that the Ravens are missing right now. And I'm not saying they're J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards or Marcus Peters level players, but they certainly can make a positive impact and will give them continuity, and that's the biggest thing. So if they can establish that, I still think the season can be a playoff year for the Ravens. They can still really do a lot of damage in the playoffs, but this loss was not encouraging. It was not inspiring. It was not anything other than embarrassing and disappointing. And while there are some positives to take away, there are a lot more negatives. And with a loss like this, I've talked about before how the mentality between a win and a loss, regardless of, how big a win is or how small of a margin a win is, the Ravens against Kansas City or Indianapolis or any of those, kind of close come from behind wins like Minnesota, if those were losses, the mood would have been so different. The adjustments would have been, I think, a lot bigger. But because the Ravens didn't win them, it's like, all right, yeah, we won the football game. And I just think the mood was different. So these losses, the Cincinnati loss, the Miami loss will be wake-up calls. I think it'll be all right. I think Baltimore will be okay. But this loss does nothing but shadow some doubts or cast some doubts over this organization, which, is understandable. It was a pretty disappointing loss. But at the end of the day, I think Baltimore will be fine. That's all I have for you today, though, here on Locked On Ravens. We'll take a 2-day break, and when we get back here on Monday, we'll be continuing to talk about this Ravens team. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you on Monday.